Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much to all for making time in your agenda to join us today for this Encore Travel webinar. For those that do not know me, I'm Elsa, head of the Strategic Partnership Department, and I will have the pleasure to facilitate this webinar today with Michelle, our communication specialist, and with Fred, our analyst. We are in a period that will mark history, not just for the travel industry, but also as an economic downfall, as well as a societal turn. I'm ready to bet that kids under 10 today also will be gratified with a new letter for their generational group in the upcoming year, as COVID certainly managed to put a stop to the millennials. For the best of the worst, that is still to be debated, but that will be on another webinar. At Encore, we focus on travel, more precisely on corporate travel. This leads us to deliver expertise in unexpected areas of the businesses of our Canadian and US clients. We are the trusted advisors should you want to implement a duty of care program, increase policy compliance, or put plans in action to generate savings or optimize your travel budget. We have been in business for 33 years and we are here to stay. Our operations obviously took a hit with the pandemic, but we have the chance not to be focused on solely booking travel, and we managed to redirect our efforts on the broader scope of travel program management. I have the pleasure to introduce you to Fred Gatali, our greatest asset within the strategic partnership team. Fred holds the position of analyst for client solution and insights. You heard the news and you need to make sense of it as a potential impact on your company. He's definitely your guy. The session of today is focused on the tumultuous period that are the past 6 months, how it has impacted the travel industry, which responses that has ensued, as well as what is transpiring over time. Throughout this period together, Fred will be going through the reactions and impact of COVID-19 on the travel industry, how airlines have reacted, how their business thinking has changed, and support it with different data points that he has gathered and made sense of. Additionally, Fred is also looking at different metrics for other modes of transportation, such as rail and car, as well as speak on the hotel industry and the expectations going forward. A little housekeeping before we jump into it. This session is recorded and will be shared in our weekly newsletter of tomorrow. Please mute yourself, mute your microphones, not to disturb the course of the presentation with background noise. After working remotely for 6 months now, we all know this can happen, even if you try your very best. We tested this setup internally, and it seems that there is quite a lag between what we say and what you hear. So in case you have any questions over the course of the webinar, it will be better to use the Q&A system. Do you see the question mark icon on the top right corner of the screen? This is it. You even have the possibility to identify yourself as the person you wish. So we expect some creativity here on your part to compensate for not hearing your voices. Questions will be reviewed at the end of each section and answered to the best of our abilities. I think this is all. So Fred, the floor is yours.
So thank you, Elsa, and good morning, everyone. So as Elsa mentioned, I'll be going through the different facets of the business travel industry, and as well just the travel industry within the past, I guess, 7.5 months since the beginning of this crazy times that we're in, which is the COVID-19 pandemic. So as I'm going through this will be an informational session, but I also want it to be a little bit of a conversation. So please feel free to ask any questions, and myself or Elsa will answer them to the best of our abilities as time permits. So I think the best thing is to just go straight into it. I'll start off with the airline industry and sort of the timeline of what we've seen and the effect of travel. So to start off, on 5th of March of this year, Canada had its first COVID transmission community case. By the 10th, we heard that the EU had imposed a travel ban on all its states. By the 18th, we found that Canada closed all its borders. So this was including our neighbors in the south, the US border. And so in these small time period, we had a huge change. And I think most of our sentiment changed very quickly from what some of us thought would be something that would blow over quickly or something that would not affect us at all, became a very real circumstance for us to have to deal with. And especially in this context, which we're in the travel industry, right? So by the 23rd of March, a lot of social distancing enforcement was put in place. Non-essential workplaces closed as well. This is when our life really got turned upside down. By June, we had some good news, as some families of citizens in the Canadian context were able to cross the border to come here. And most recently, which is just a couple of days ago, the government extended its travel restrictions. And I don't know where all the participants are in this webinar, but here in Montreal, at the same time, there was also an announcement that we'd basically be in lockdown for the next 28 days as well. So this is a circumstance that changes all the time and keeps changing. And as the data comes in, it's very hard to quantify or to forecast where we'll be headed in 3 to 6 months from now, because it's all dependent on how quickly we can get, for example, a vaccine to this virus, how quickly we can react to the changes that happen every day based on the cases that arise. So if we go straight to the airline industry, I'm going to start off with Air Canada and WestJet. So these are the biggest airlines in which most of the flights in Canada also take. So in a broad view of airlines globally, there have been some of the worst hits since the emergence of this COVID, especially talking in a business context. So as many of you might be aware, airlines have sought some form of funding package from different governments, whether it be our neighbor in the US or in Europe. The Canadian landscape has not had that same case. However, we do see it still in trouble and sort of stringing along to find some sort of customers and to get travelers back on their planes. As you know, COVID is airborne and transmission is easy from one person to the next. And so this also makes airlines and airplanes some of the easiest facilitators in the spread of this disease across the world, and hence why they've also been some of the most affected as a result. So what this graph over here shows is that Air Canada and WestJet has taken the lead in the continuous routes across Canada. Porter Airlines, which is another big domestic airlines here, was closed for the past 5 to 6 months. And so what these graphs show are Air Canada and WestJet. At the early onset of this pandemic, it became important that the airlines explicitly state on their website which routes were still being flown. Reason being that many routes did not have enough passengers flying and traffic to warrant the airlines to travel to those destinations. As well, it became important to state the frequency at which these active routes would be flown. So the previously most active routes remained the way they were, but to a lesser extent. So for example, if flights from Montreal to Toronto were departing pre-COVID 6 times a day, the schedule was changed to 3 times a day, still ahead of the other routes for sure. So we found that there was a proportional reduction of flights across Canada. No one area, I would say, remained at normal levels, while others completely lost all their visitors or all their travelers. So if we start off with WestJet on top, in May, which was one of the lowest periods, there were a total of 535 passenger flights weekly. So to put this in context, this is a very much massive drop from the thousands of weekly flights that are usual for WestJet, that caters to a large percentage of passengers across Canada. The paths and increase of airlines as well are still correlated with how secure passengers feel in flying again. So WestJet showed a continuous increase month over month, showing the biggest bump up between June and July as provinces moved to next levels in their open procedures, as business opened up, and as there were more control in spread and movement tracking. Though there's still a long way to go, WestJet still managed to almost triple their flights between May and August. So that was a positive sign. Air Canada, on the bottom graph, has a similar trend. However, it has a drop in routes in August. So as I had mentioned earlier, there really is an interesting pattern to see between the flights and the COVID transmission. Air Canada overshot its outlook on the pandemic and had to retract some of the routes as the forecasted pickup in certain regions did not go as expected. So this also led to many provinces. We know that provinces such as in the Atlantic Canada created sort of a bubble to keep to control the amount of cases that would arise within their area. So this pullback, this increase in the transmission resulted in a slight pullback by Air Canada to readjust their own routes. So as a passenger, as you look for that certainty or certainty within some of these cases, what you should be noting is that flights are surely but slowly coming back in due time, but nonetheless, they are at the mercy of how the consumer feels, how safe we feel in terms of catching flights again, and as well as the resumption of businesses within these different areas. So as I move to this next slide, it's also interesting because as I talk about air travel, we have very interesting components to the sort of flights we have seen through these past 7 months and which segments have dominated. We usually separate our flights in the travel industry into 3 segments of classification. Domestic, which in this case refers to inter-Canada flights, transborder, which are flights that are Canada-US or US-Canada. Then last is international, which deals with all other non-US international destinations. So the graph to the left indicates the trend in the movement of aircrafts. And as you can see, the domestic portion, which will be talked about later into more detail, still dominates the major portion. Obviously, this is as a result of most of our international flights not being active anymore due to government restrictions and regulations. Only those really flying are cargo and other repatriation flights that are bringing back some of the citizens into Canada. Now, what's interesting is that there was a poll taken by GBTA around June, which showed that 58% of participants expected domestic travel to resume within 2 to 3 months. Though the time has come, we're not fully there yet because we see that we're having these second waves of transmissions that are coming through, which means that the business traveler is taking a longer time to get back to their meetings, to get back to the usual as business procedures. So the same poll looked at international travel, and only 18% of participants thought that there would be a resumption of international travel, while the majority, which are 46%, said that we'd be back to flying internationally within 6 to 8 months period. So that puts the resumption of international travel around January. Now, given the data points that we know today, I don't think based on the data we have that we'll be back to this high international travel by January. So we could move out of the timeline based on the current standard that we have by sort of 3 months. So we should expect travel to resume internationally, perhaps by March, April of next year, as it slowly just bumps up and each country feels more and more comfortable with the way they're handling their situation. And as well, if there could be a vaccine, which will highly, highly change the way people feel about traveling. So I'll move on to more into Canadian airports and what we've seen. So this, So this slide shows the amount of traffic that goes through, and that has been going through the past 6 to 7 months in major Canadian airports. In the same procession, you see from the airport with the highest traffic and volume of flights to the least. Now, what is interesting to note is that this graph shows flights from March 18th of this year throughout these different airports. And what we see is that between the 3-week period of June 19th to July 6th, we're on average double the amount of flights that were seen in the 3-month period between March 18th and June 18th. So now when we talk about the exasperation of the air industry and air travel, this is a very good graph to look at because it highlights the full decrease and reduction in the amount of flights taking place, where governments and airlines were struggling to make sense of how to go forward in the travel industry. So, as I had spoken about earlier, is the shift to more domestic travel in the short term. I expect this to have a huge impact on the average trip length going forward. So for international travel to resume, there will have to be confidence in the safety measures that are in place. But what this means is that we shouldn't expect to find pre-COVID 29 levels to be reached in the next couple of years, but possibly within even a period of 5 years, right? So by 2025, we expect that the average trip length, which should be also an indicator of the resumption back to international travel, should have at least reached 2013, 2014 levels. So what to note is that you might be wondering, why is there a spike between 2013 and 2014, and how would that be looked at today? So the spike between 2013 and 2014 was the result of the growth in the passenger travel on airlines in emerging markets. So those include those in Asia, Asian Pacific regions, and the Middle East. These areas today even continue to show this gradual improvement in the flights and passenger travel, which still should be a positive indicator for the travel industry going forward. So as the current trip length might not show a necessary recovery for the next 4 years, I think overall we should expect a more quicker recovery due to these additional airlines from these regions. And one thing to note is that many of these airlines do have a support from their governments, which means that they're more likely to stay within travel than out, right? Next, so now that we understand how the aviation industry has been performing and the impact of COVID, we need to understand who are the players in business travel that will be helping the recovery. So this chart here shows the segments of business travel that are likely to return first. Let's look through the type of travel, the reasoning behind this travel, and the industry in which the travelers work. The first and earliest group of travelers will be those that will be in a rented vehicle or a personal vehicle that will be traveling for sales or client meetings. These will be people looking to make business that is quick and under a specific goal, most likely in the sales department. And this first group of people will feel more comfortable in close proximity settings, which make the traveler feel more in control. So within this first group of people in relation to the industry, we're more likely to see the construction and manufacturing industry likely being the first industries putting their workers back to more or less pre-COVID routines. The next level of travelers will be those who will be traveling domestically, whether through air or train. And the reason for them traveling will most likely be for training programs that they need to partake in, for small gatherings, as well as possible internal meetings that cannot be accommodated virtually. So in the same instance, the next few major industries that will be next in going back to normal work procedures after the manufacturing and construction industry would most likely be the finance sector, the real estate industry, as well as other tech and energy industries that tend to be more customer-centric with a need for movement to conduct business. And finally, the third group of travelers that are most likely to be traveling are those international travelers. Excuse me. Obviously, given the different government regulation and restrictions that we put in place, this will determine how quick they do so. And the reasoning for travel would be to attend conferences, to attend big events and exhibitions, and to attend more large-scale meetings that can not be done virtually. So with this last group, the last few industries that are most likely to catch up will be the education sector in terms of traveling, and as well as the healthcare sector and other professional industries. Now, international travel will take longer to rebound because of the complexity of government regulations, the mandatory quarantines, and the high risk of fast-changing policies. Now, as we look at companies that are sales-focused, they should have more urgency to return to face-to-face meetings, but this will require that all parties involved be comfortable with the travel required. So the lead will be taken based on the comfortability of management to allow these employees back to their offices and to have in-person meetings. Now, not to be forgotten, travel can also resume as a function of increased competition. So businesses will be monitoring their competitors to gauge how quick they are returning to travel, how quick the pressure might mount for them to to recover the speed of travel to get in front of their clients and make their case and create their and increase their sales. So in all, what we should expect is a quick rush to business travel once it restarts. So it'll almost be like a domino effect where each competitor is gauging how they're doing and reacting based on that. So for company internal in-person meetings, these will take longer to resume, considering that most can be done accommodated through some sort of virtual meeting. As probably many people in these participants, and as this webinar is happening, we can do a lot of things internally through our desktops while being at home. So for these in-person meetings, internal in-person meetings to arise back again, it will most likely be in a scenario where it's very urgent, and they should be part of just normal business resumption. So additionally, another group of people that will most likely be going back to the office first will be those that deal with data and infrastructure, who will be at the forefront of the prioritization in the working space. But given the economic constraints across industries, especially those that are hit hardest by the pandemic, internal travel budgets, I feel, will probably be disproportionately cut. Just due to that, internal meetings and other offsite gatherings may not return well into next year or even further than that. And I imagine that many travel that have internal purposes will probably be permanently replaced into virtual meetings. We're all getting comfortable working from home. We're getting comfortable having this, having to navigate talking to people online. And so I think this effect will probably continue, and this will be something that will affect business travel. So the business travel for the major industry events will most likely be the last to return, because this will require a higher degree of confidence in public safety. All the conferences and trade shows are critical networking opportunities. They're also very high risk areas and will be the last to return. So going forward, are some key points on how air travel will change for both the airlines, the traveler, and all other parties. So these changes will reflect the worries that a traveler might have right now, but will also reflect the shift that the airline industry was going through before COVID-19, which have had to be accelerated. So what are some of these accelerated shifts? One, we should expect an even greater integration of a digital journey that require fewer person-to-person interaction. We already see this in some airports where everything from check-in to baggage claim do not have any person-to-person interaction and have full contactless procedures. So as a travel manager or traveler, you should also be on the lookout for companies that are investing in the use of analytics to make your journey as quick and as cheap as possible. Those that are optimizing the processes during this period will come out greater, right? And more important, simplifying the user experience presents an opportunity. So if we look in dollar terms alone, simplifying the ticket retailer experience will have a value of $4 billion annually by 2030, according to IATA. So further on the outlook, businesses will also need to look outside the industry to understand changing consumer expectations and interactions with other consumer industries. So not only how they interact with hotels or airlines. So the development of our interactions will converge eventually. We are, as you can see today, a much more environmentally conscious people, and businesses must find a way to offset carbon emissions, and it will also be important to find companies that take these measures seriously. Furthermore, as we look at this on what to expect going forward, is the concentration on customer experience. I don't think it needs to be reiterated more on how important this aspect and this component is right now. A company that will function well in these times is one that has agile teams that take into account all the consumers' pain points and then create an experience for their traveler that flows across all the points. So at the highest level, these companies will recognize real returns. And on average, these companies that do concentrate on customer experience tend to outperform their peers by nearly 3-to-1 in terms of revenue. So when the COVID-19 pandemic halted around the globe, we talked about businesses, travelers having to move from personal meetings and events to virtual platforms. And this also has to result in increased service offerings. So what are they offering extra that these travel companies or airlines are offering the passenger to allow them to have the safety net that they feel comfortable flying? We've seen this with many airlines imposing, imposing their safety measures that they've undertaken, and the sort of events that will allow these industries to pop up. And furthermore, as it comes to pricing of airlines, it's really all about supply and demand. I know this may be a big question that many of you are looking to understand. And as the travel is down right now, airlines are looking to find any incentives to return the travel back on their flights. So this will mean that in the short term, we should expect lower prices until demand goes up, with which things should adjust back to normal. Now, as we move to how Ankur can help you and sort of our advice to you, also will take charge. Also, you're on mute if you're talking.
Thank you. Thank you, Fred, for this broad overview of the situation. Who would have expected the situation we are in currently just 1 year ago? The most trendy initiative was carbon footprint at the time, as Fred mentioned. So no need to say the focus has deviated a little. We all hope that it will be back once this will resume as a major question. In March, when we speak about deviation of focus, duty of care suddenly became a reality. And we at Encore put all hands on deck to make sure all travelers were taken care of. It was a hell of a month in April, dealing with the cancellations, with daily reporting, with constant updates of credit rules and negotiations with airlines. This has led to numerous discussions and also the birth of new solutions to better manage this money held up by the airlines. Then was the period of May and June, where we focused a lot on emergency policies and also communication, helping our companies to get organized to face the pandemic, to stay in control of the risk when sending their colleagues on a business trip. We supported them through updates of configurations on the online booking tools to reflect the new reality and with crucial communication plans. Nothing was more important than having well-informed travelers. This is also when our weekly newsletter has been created. Thank you very much for following us. The summer has been focused on solutions to revisit the broader scope of travel risk programs and achieve two major objectives. For travel managers to have the right tools in hand to increase their visibility and also to communicate efficiently. And for our travelers to have the best feed of information to travel in confidence and be alerted in case of increased risk. There has been a constant, though, over the past 6 months. Our agents have been continuously trained and informed about country regulations and airline measures. They have always been your go-to person if you are unsure of how to prepare for your trip, and this is a little sadly even more true now than pre-COVID. I'm going to take questions from the Q&A section. I see there is none. So just as a reminder, do not hesitate to post any questions you might have through the Q&A section. I can also take questions in French, obviously, so don't be shy. Back to you, Fred.
Thank you, Elsa. So the next section that we'll move through are hotels. Globally, hotels are at 29% occupancy right now compared to a 72% over the same period last year. And in the hotel segment section, we'll look at 3 very important metrics. And the first is occupancy rate. The second is the daily rate of the hotels. And the third is the revenue per available room. And in this graph, we see a rise between January and February, which was expected for the whole year, until we got hit by COVID-19. From March onwards to June, we have seen a large decline in the occupancy and the revenue per available room. Now, the hotel industry is very seasonal and fluctuates with demand depending on the time of the year. Typically, May and June have a high influx of guests within these hotels, and usually city hotels are flourishing in the amount of tourists and business travelers staying in these hotels. But as this year has been very different, we've seen a very slow increase between May and June in the occupancy rates as well as the daily rates. For hotels, we know that business travel is usually done between cities and city centers, which have a high density, which also makes these areas more of a risk of COVID transmission, and are usually the centers of higher COVID cases. So therefore, it's not surprising that many business travelers are no longer traveling to these city centers, and therefore these city hotels and hotels globally, I should say, even in non-city centers, have seen a huge reduction in the amount of guests that are usually present. Now, if we look further at the numbers, we'll look at the expectation of some of these big hotel chains and sort of our outlook going to 2020 and how sort of that has been adjusted over the same period. So we see that there was expected an average daily rate increase from $163 to $167, which presents a 2.4% increase. But with the 2020 COVID adjustment, there has been a reduction of 15% that has been adjusted to account for COVID. And this means that we don't even see between 2021 and 2022 the rates going back to how they used to be. Now, the biggest thing too has been the revenue per available room. Again, between 2019 and 2020, pre-COVID, there was an expectation to go between $106 to $109, which represents about a 3% increase. But with this new 2020 COVID adjusted and just the lack of the lack of revenue coming to these hotels, there's been a reduction of 50%. So this is a very huge reduction. And as I was talking earlier to show that other graph with air travel, what shows how these industries have been affected, I think this is also a very good look at how the hotel industry has been affected, right? So as we talk about hotel, what can we consider going forward? So again, similar to air, we should expect a more seamless experience. So online check-in should be commonplace. You should be able to get to your room without any person-to-person interaction, given the sort of safety standards that are put in place currently. As I said, you should expect a decrease in hotel prices in the short term as these hotels try to pump up the volume and the amount of people to go to their hotels. You should expect a versatility in the hotel space use. So some of these hotels will be using their space for other means. So recently we've seen some of these hotels during this COVID times that have used their space to host communities that no longer have a place to stay. So these hotels should have a more community involvement, which I expect to carry on. So as a traveler looking to decide which hotel you want to stay in, and you're very much a person who's involved in the community and love community outreach work, you should start looking at these hotels that are involved in these kind of programs and what they're doing to help their city or their surrounding community. And the last thing that I expect is mergers in the hotel industry. Now, this comes from the fact that when hotels and other industries, other companies are in a precarious position that is detrimental to the businesses, they need to create more cooperation among them. So as we saw after the 2009-2010 financial crisis, where airlines created a lot of mergers and merged together in order to sustain that time period, I expect the same to be for hotel chains as well, who will most likely be changing the way they do business in order to maximize the revenue and to maximize their cost cutting as well. So I'll leave it to Elsa for this portion.
I'm unmuted. Thank you, Fred, for this insightful analysis. the hospitality business has been without any doubt the most impacted category within the industry. In Canada, some cities were seeing a double-digit increase in rates year over year since the past couple of years. This has stopped abruptly when COVID hit in March, and the most common reaction we saw was actually a stop of the operations, pure and simple. Many hotels have to close their door. The summer showed increased number of properties reopening as chains were getting organized and implemented solutions to resume operations, navigating through government regulations and their dedication to their guests and staff. You plan a hotel stay in the near future? You are unsure of how to be prepared? According to an interview we hosted with Mr. Vito Curali from Hilton, the most important consideration is not to expect an experience as you were used to pre-pandemic. All the protocols have been revisited to accommodate the least possible interactions between people. The whole contrary on what was hospitality before that. Take a step further and know more about what your stay will be like exactly. We strongly recommend that you refer to our hotel checklist published on our newsletter and also available on our website's blog. This will help you identify what kind of questions can you ask a hotel to prepare. Will the restaurants be open? What are the hours of operation? Are you allowed to receive a guest? Are you allowed to receive a delivery for food, for example? You are ready to check in at your hotel, but you are having second thoughts on the cleanliness of the premises, or you saw something that makes you feel unsafe to stay. Just call us. Any time of the 7 days of the week, we will have things sorted out for you. You're a travel manager and you wonder what to do with your hotel program next year. Me and my team are ready to discuss with you the reality of the market and the future of the industry. The core component of a successful hotel program is really the right balance for your company between travelers' convenience and cost control. The relationship component is also crucial. It is to be nurtured on the long run. Hotels are typically small enterprises operating franchises from big chains. Even with the huge Marriott or Hilton sign at the entrance, they still have a local mindset. They value a lot socialization as well as mutual benefits relationships. I'm taking questions on my other screen, so I offer you my best profile. Fred, we have a question relating to the rate forecast for international destinations. The question here is, are these lower rates for 2021 and 2022 anticipated internationally as well?
Thanks for the question. Yes, they are expected to be low internationally. However, I do need to say that these are the rates in the short term that are expected to be lower. So again, it will really depend on the kind of hotel that it is. But across the business traveler, we see that on average, they will be at lower rates, yes.
Thank you. We also have a second question more related to the previous section. That is around credits with airlines. Will our credits with airline expire, or will they honor them when we start traveling again? All the credits have an expiry date. From what we saw since the beginning of the pandemic, all airlines tend to align on a 2-year period for expiration. This is not set in stone. We have seen in the past couple of months that airlines tend to adapt to the reality of the market and what's coming for them. So it's not because you today have an expiration date for, let's say, the end of December of this year, that this might not be extended for another year, for example. There is not much you can do about extension of airlines validity, but we are in negotiation with airlines constantly since the beginning of the pandemic to ensure our clients have the most flexibility as possible. So we work on lengthen the expiration dates of the credits. We also work on combining all the credits under another form of payment, for example, just to facilitate the use of them, facilitate the visibility of these credits, and make sure this is not the money that is lost at the end. This is it for the questions. So back to you, Fred, for the last portion of our webinar.
Awesome, thanks, Elsa. So not last, but one of the last, after we've gone through the major, are car rentals. So car rentals, like any other, have not been immune to the business effects of COVID-19. There have been cuts across the workforces of companies such as Avis, Enterprise, and Hertz, and it's been harder to offload some aspects as companies have had to sell off some inventory cars to meet their functional goals. Now, many of these companies still have ongoing costs relating to renting of spaces, for example, for those prime positions at airports that make their services so easily accessible to the business traveler. Now, however, there is a caveat, right? Car rental companies are still in the best position in the short term, even if they are facing a lower demand and new threats. So, as I talked earlier regarding the short, medium, and long-term impact of travel, car rentals are in the best position to capture the short-term markets, just given the fact that travelers and companies will feel more comfortable going to the locations that are closer in proximity. So given this aspect, car rental companies find themselves in a position where they have to toe the line between being able to handle their costs while at the same time being able to take advantage of the short-term possibilities that might reduce their costs and increase the revenue. However, with this short-term impact of travel and the advantages that come with it, there also comes competition. For example, we're all aware of the ride-sharing company called Uber, and what they've been doing in some markets currently, starting even with the European markets, is that they've started a new program that caters to short-term rentals of their drivers' cars. So as many companies look to stay afloat and expand during this period, they do face increased competition, and Uber is one of them that has allowed their drivers to eventually lease out and rent out the cars in the short term. And additionally, in this graph, you will see just an example of the way this time period has been for some of these car rental companies. So here we have a North American view of Enterprise for the past 6 months, up from January to June, and we see that on average in January the average weekly reservations were 194,000, whereas by June, even if there was a slight rebound, there was an average weekly booking of $38,000. This is a huge reduction and a big change operationally for a company that is this big. So again, this is another graph that shows just the impact of these car rental companies that is synonymous with what I had shown earlier in terms of hotels and as well as airlines. So next is rail. So in transportation, if you look to the graph to the left, what's called dwell time or terminal dwell time is the time that a vehicle such as a train spends at a scheduled stop without moving. So typically, this time is spent boarding or deboarding passengers, but it may also be spent waiting for traffic ahead to clear, trying to merge into parallel traffic, or even idle time in order to get back on schedule. So usually dwell time is one of the common measures of efficiency in public transportation. So with shorter dwell times usually being a universal desire, right? So shorter dwell time is usually a great thing. However, in this period, we see that companies and airlines, rail have shorter dwell times between March and May. So you'd ask yourself, this should be good, but no. In this aspect, dwell time, the decrease of dwell time is a negative, because what it means is that there are not enough trains on the lines. There are not enough passengers going through, right? And the problem with that means that not enough passengers are going through. And as we see, as it comes to June and it resumes a little bit more to normal levels, that shows again what should be a negative impact is positive in this instance, because it means that cargo is going again. We see passengers getting back on these trains, and the comfortability level of business travelers. So as a business traveler, you should look into trains for travel, the sort of procedures they have in place for travel, and as well you should look at the prices that they have enacted and whether your routes are still very much active. On the graph to the right, it shows rail cars online, which has taken a slight decrease versus a comparison chart I put of other aircraft movements. So we see the slight reduction of passenger cars, whereas aircraft movements have totally gone down as was expected. Now, part of this is that the impact was not such greater for rail cars is that passenger flights sometimes also carry cargo, right? And what the rail industry has been able to take advantage is to increase its cargo efficiency and components that were usually within the aircraft segment and carry them into rail. So we should see a lot more rail cargo traveling as opposed to air cargo anymore, which has been reduced by the decrease in flight travels as well, passenger flight travels. So last but not least, as we move to the final section, I just thought it would be interesting to look at how we moved between Intercity Dynamics and sort of what has been the effect within the way we travel in our cities. So the chart to the left will show the differences in congestion between the year 2020 and 2019. So we can easily note that a large difference between this decreased congestion in 2019 and 2020 versus 2019. As we look at this graph, we'll come up with a few conclusions. One being that obviously as a form of social distancing and movement restrictions that many of the governments have imposed within our cities does lead to fewer cars and fewer transportations, fewer buses, fewer movements within the cities itself. So additionally, it can be noted that businesses do not yet have the proper confidence level to allow their employees and other stakeholders within the company to return back to work. So as we're looking here, the cities most affected are those that have more cases and had to implement stricter travel and social distance restrictions, such as Montreal and Toronto. And there are also cities that have higher density of people within these regions, making them inherently, all things remaining the same, higher transmission risk areas. Now, I like to look at these sort of statistics because it allows me and Encore to be informed on how things are moving along, when we should expect to start planning for you as a business traveler to go back to normal, and how we can advise on how things are going back to normal and how your businesses across the different cities are reacting. So the chart to the right shows the use of public transportation in the transit systems in Canada as a whole. Again, not much of a surprise, huge reduction as expected between the numbers in February to May and the slight increase in June again. So this is very much in line with the measures that have been taken on the loosening of these travel restrictions that has allowed commuters and other persons to travel within these regions. Elsa, are you there?
Yes, I am here. Michelle, can you change? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Fred. Just a little poll out there. Who knew about dwell time? For real. I thought that was like a very, very interesting KPI to measure and have a sense of what's happening in terrestrial and transportation. The fear factor of air travel and being stuck with unknown individuals led corporate travelers to travel less or to concentrate on local travels. This trend supported the rental car industry with an earlier rebound than airlines from this category of travelers. Let's face it, customer traveler will be one of the last category to resume travel. typically happening in downtown areas where the virus clusters are the most virulent. This also shows in that interesting insight from Fred about the congestion and usage of public transportation. Yes, people are working remotely, which is the largest factor for the trend shown, but corporate travelers are coming second in the list. When we will be ready to hit the road again, let's challenge our habits and consider a broader range of transportation methods. Maybe a train would do just as fine as a plane. Maybe renting a car is the safest choice than taking taxi rides. I'm gonna see if there are questions. No new questions on this side. So as a conclusion, our time is already almost up. So on behalf of the whole Encore team, thank you very much for attending this webinar. It has been a great pleasure to connect with you today. Stay tuned on further industry news from our weekly newsletter and also from our LinkedIn accounts. And most importantly, stay safe and see you soon.
Awesome. I will myself make just a final remark, and it's that if there is a takeaway from this time, it is that the travel industry is here to stay. It's going to experience some form of consolidation. It's going to transform more digitally, and it will incur a rebound. So as a traveler or a travel manager, your experience with how you handle travel will become more seamless and the process more enjoyable. So meanwhile, as we go through this transition period, those who take opportunity to position themselves during these cloudy days will be better for it. Thank you, everyone.